Mark Ricker, production designer for Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. This play is the only one of August Wilson's Pittsburgh cycle that's not set in Pittsburgh. It's in Chicago, but ironically, you guys still shot in Pittsburgh, turning it into Chicago. So how did that come about?
Well, it was a decision made without me. They had decided to shoot in Pittsburgh before I came onto the project, and I can only assume that a lot of it had to do with the fact that August Wilson is from Pittsburgh, and Denzel Washington and Todd Black made fences in Pittsburgh, and I think that they had a good experience there, and so that decision was just made to be there.
Mm-hmm. So at what point did you come aboard? Were they already like pretty far into like pre-production, like planning in Pittsburgh and doubling it as Chicago?
No, you know what I think happened again. I got a call about the project, and it was about 7.5 weeks away from shooting. So I think that there was a window that made itself available with Viola's shooting schedule from her television show. So I came on very quickly. I read it very quickly. I met George quickly, and then just headed for Pittsburgh and started the process of trying to figure it all out. But I think that they had hired a location manager who luckily had done a little bit of preliminary scouting. So I was able to get on the phone with him quickly and look at some stuff in New York City, where I'm from, before I headed down there. But everything else was, we started from zero, aside from a few locations to consider. And I looked at those with George on the computer before I left town, because he was going to be busy with rehearsals and doing everything else that he had to do. So there was a certain amount that I was just going to be flying by the seat of my pants. And so that's what we did.
Mm-hmm. So what did you and George discuss? Because there's basically like 3 sets. It's based on a play, but it's like the rehearsal studio, or the rehearsal basement, and the studio, and then like the streets outside.
Yeah, I mean, there was the theater. We ended up building the theater as well, because we lost the location. So we built that, and the tent as well. But, we really just, we looked at the material. We discussed the concept of the fact that that our recording studio would be housed inside an old factory building that had been reappropriated in a way. I mean, I hadn't yet gotten into that level of research yet to learn that it wasn't unusual. In fact, it was the technology and the systems for the recording studios. They were at the beginning of their own history. So they were already, reappropriating other spaces. So we just decided that it would be in an industrial neighborhood, and so we put it in the rear of a factory. I found out later that the real Paramount recording studios had actually been in a chair factory. So we felt good about that once we figured that out. So I really researched, aside from recording studio equipment and photographs of what existed from that period of time. Architecturally, I really researched factories. I just wanted to find out what that world would be. And then once I got the 2 in my head, then we figured out, how to fold them in together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it has a very like industrial feel to it. And I really like the basement too, because it's basically, or mostly, like all brick. Like I think the floors are brick as well, right?
The floor was the only thing that was there. We built our stages, our sets in an old abandoned or converted steel factory, and there was a little piece of brick floor that it was exquisite, and it was an opportunity that presented itself. So we positioned that set on that section of floor. The rest of it was all a set. The timbers. The only other authentic thing, obviously, was I found these 4 gorgeous timbers that were going to be impossible to use to wild out of the way, because they just weighed a ton. So I sort of begged and cajoled my construction team to figure out a way that they hollowed them out and put them back together so that we could use those timbers. But the rest was just the artistry of our construction and scenic team who really created that space. Mm-hmm. It was difficult, it was small and it was simple in a way on paper, but a little terrifying for the amount of pages that took place in that room to to come up with something that would, you know, be an interesting place to spend that amount of time in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, there's like good contrast with like the outdoors, the streets, because it's very like sun drenched, and then the recording studio, it's more clean, and then I like the elevated like office area where like her manager is, because that also like creates more space. So was that an original by you? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you just wanted to add that for like depth and height? Yeah.
The glass booth. That was, you know, that also came from the concept of the fact that if it had been a factory floor, that was where the sort of overseer, the manager, which would have been his office, to just look down on whatever was being manufactured. But it lent itself to the you know, the concept of having to be in a booth as well. It was actually by design, in conversation with George, to have the sense of the sereneness. Serene is the wrong word, but the busyness of the exterior with all the graphics and the cars and the sign, the hardware and everything that was going on out there. And then as you entered down that alleyway, which we constructed beside the factory, which was a location, we built the alleyway, and then it just visually, it just simplifies and sort of creates itself as a funnel to then lead to, you know, a more sort of entombed rear, dark, simple space visually. I wanted there to just be, you know, it really looked at the lines and the textures a lot, so that there was never any sort of vacant space, but it was a pretty controlled palette in the basement and also in the studio, to just allow, you know, really I wanted all focus to just be on what the actors were doing, and so that you would listen to what they were saying.
Yeah, the basement is particularly dark, but I like that there's just like one window, and then that's where like the minimal sunlight comes in.
The famous window. You know, it was interesting. We didn't have a cinematographer for a long time, and Tobias, who came in very late in the game, I think he literally landed with 13 days before we were shooting. The script described it as a windowless basement room, and for the longest time, Jim Truesdale, my art director in crime, would say, well, of course there has to be a window. And I would say, you know, I know there has to be a window, but until we have a DP who can back me up on this, you know, I've got some ideas in the back of my head, but it was a process, because George was adamant. He was really determined that he didn't want there to be a window. He didn't want there to be any sense of escape. That he said once he wanted it to evoke the hull of a slave ship. So I looked at references for that and tried to figure out how to combine the two worlds to get that emotion. But even doors, I mean, there's the door that Chad can't get through, and eventually he does, to no exit. But aside from that, even doors, I mean, I eliminated, if there was any exit, any way to get out of there. So the introduction of that window was a bit of a journey, and you know, eventually it did everything that it needed to do, even aside from letting light in there. It was just the fact that it was so high and so small, but it was a good window.
It worked with some of the monologues in there too. So,
well, it did. I mean, some of my sort of my pitch to George is that, you know, it would lend itself so well to, we don't know what would be happening out there, but the fact that there's all of this activity out there that, you know, we could pick and choose, or they could, if somebody just like plopped a crate in front of it. So it's like the light would go away and then it would disappear. And then, you know, the fact that all of the action was over the course of a couple of hours, they could really design the movement of the light that came through that room, and pick and choose when to have it and when not to. And I think that, you know, Tobias did a brilliant job of taking advantage of that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, this is your second film with Chadwick Boseman, in which he plays a musician, because you guys did Get On Up. So what was it like building sets for him to perform again?
Well, you know, it was interesting. There was a moment, the first time that the band and Ma got together on camera and performed was in the tent, which opens the film. And there was a moment when we were rehearsing that night. It was sort of a magical night with fireflies and the smell of the hay and everything. But the stage that we built for the band, we had built a boxing ring in a flashback sequence in Get On Up, where a young James Brown was boxing on this boxing ring, and I just thought, oh well, that's the same language. It's basically a stage with a platform without the ropes, but we'll just use the same thing. And the night that we were there, Chad was pulling his horn out of the case, and I just caught his eye and basically told him that I just pulled the old file out and built him another stage for for another performance, and he loved it. I mean, he recognized everything that we need to do to pull it all off. So I think he was charmed by that.
So.
Well,
hey, if it works. Well, Mark, it was great speaking with you. Thank you so much.